People that work in the wedding industry, have you ever seen a couple and immediately thought this ends in divorce? Why? Not sure if this belongs here, since I'm really sure that they got divorced after, but anyway, I was helping out at my parents' restaurant, where a huge wedding party was hosted. I was busy serving drinks and suddenly loud yelling and screaming started right behind me. Turns out the bride had somehow found out that the groom had hooked up with her sister right before the wedding ceremony, and apparently on a few occasions before, and in her anger she stabbed him in the chest with a dinner fork several times. We had to call an ambulance and the police. It was like hell. Edit. I didn't expected this story to blow up that much, but since a bunch of people asked, I just called my mom and asked about this story, and apparently the former bride's parents are still regular guests at my parents' restaurant. Not for weddings though, and according to my mother they told that the groom and the bride's sister now actually have 2 children together and are planning on getting married, but had to cancel their wedding multiple times due COVID-19. Edit second. Since a bunch of people asked, no, I don't know what happened to the bride or how she and her family get along now, and neither does my mom. I don't think she went to jail for this though. She probably got sentenced to a fine or probation. This story takes place in Germany. She probably got sentenced in accordance with section 224 IS to St. GB dangerous bodily harm. All the faking time. You know how they say 50% of weddings end in divorce? I can pretty much predetermine who that 50% are going to be with about 98% accuracy. I bake wedding cakes for a living. I own my own bakery, but I've also worked in a country club kitchen, doing basically the same thing plus other pastry chef duties on the day of weddings. I've seen them both for the tasting/design consultation and on their wedding day. I see how they interact when they are just together, but also when under stress on the big day. I've seen everything. Lots of cheating, lots of drunks, lots of terrible mothers. Once had a mama's boy who ignored his wife when they were supposed to be having their cake tasting to cuddle their mother and hand feed her cake. His mother was not supposed to be there, and you could tell the bride was pissed. By the end of it, he had kissed his mother on the lips multiple times. Divorce. Have seen a woman bitch and complain at everything her fiancé said. Any suggestions he had for what he liked resulted in him being called stupid. Anytime she'd open her mouth he'd cower and flinch. Their cake actually got cancelled like a month before the wedding, so we didn't get anything but the deposit, even though we'd started baking it. First time I've lost out on money and I've been relieved. Once had this arrogant dickhead Turkish guy marrying into this Bangladeshi family. Bride was sweet, about 10 years older than him, and came from a fairly well-off family. Generally got the impression that this being a Turk/South Asian marriage was kind of a big deal, even though they're both Muslim. But since she was 30 something they wanted her to get married, so they allowed it. Guy complains about everything during the planning process, especially over them not serving alcohol. Is generally a dick to us, but is just straight up cruel to her. Like at one point, when we were meeting I asked after her wedding dress, because South Asian wedding dresses are gorgeous. She's showing me this amazing dress and he says straight up, I don't know what she picked that one. She looks fat and old in it. Every other woman is going to be more beautiful than her on her wedding day. He then shows me this dress he picked out, which isn't traditional South Asian style at all, and is very Western and very ugly, and basically makes the model in the picture look naked. It's so sheer. When she says something about how no mosque would let her dress like that, and her traditions are important, he just sneered and said she should get over it, and her traditions weren't that important. Divorce red flag. Found out later they didn't last a day. From the way the servers tell it, midway through the reception, the guy raises his hand to his new bride when she asks him a question about being drunk, and she flinches and turns away, protecting her face. He grabs her by the arm and rips her around. Bust. Her mother and aunt were standing 3 feet from her and lost their faking minds, realizing what must have been happening there. His response when mom started to lose her shit on him was to hit the mother. So in the middle of this very big, 600+ person Bangladeshi wedding, this 20-something outsider dickhead no one wanted her to marry anyway smacked a well-respected woman in their community. There was a brawl, the cops were called, marriage was annulled. Edit. Because so many of you are asking, baking a cake in the weeks leading up to the event is standard. You bake the sponge triple wrap and flash freeze. Frozen cakes are actually much less likely to taste dry or gross, because if you fresh bake they'll be sitting out for days on end until they can be decorated and absorb whatever smells are in the refrigerator and dry out. Typically we also will cover them in simple syrup after thawing but before assembly, which is why bakery cakes are so much more moist than a lot of homemade ones. I've been working as a baker since I was 15, and this is very much the practice of every place I've ever worked when it comes to celebration cakes. Not actually in the industry, but I have helped out a friend with a few weddings. 2 of the weddings I could just tell they weren't going to make it. The first wedding the bride and groom hardly talked the entire wedding. It was like they had nothing in common. And then later the groom pretty much facts off halfway through and went home because I quote he was tired. So he just left his bride having to take pictures with the wedding guests on her own. He never came back that evening, so she had to greet everyone off etc. Funny enough, about a year later I heard they're filing for divorce. Another time was actually last summer. Just before the wedding speeches the groom went to hang out with his friends for like half an hour, leaving the bride sitting there alone and delaying the speeches. Then right after the bride and groom cut the cake he once again went to hang out with his friends and abandoned his wife. So she was left alone having to mingle with all the guests, and he made no interaction with her side of the guests. He stuck with his friends the rest of the evening. His wife basically had to go and beg him to come and take more wedding pictures. At one point in the evening he actually went for a drive with his friends for about an hour and his wife had no idea where he was. I mean, I want to mingle with your friends at your wedding, but to not even mingle with your wife's family or friends on your wedding day seems quite rude. I don't work in the wedding industry, but I have a depressing wedding story. I have a friend who I grew up with. She was always gorgeous and incredibly popular with guys and I always thought she was a great person. As I got older I came to realize she was actually extremely toxic in relationships and did better when she was single. She had been seeing a new guy for 2 months when one day I received a wedding invitation in the mail. Knowing her history was a massive red flag for me. I turn up to the wedding and it's at a gorgeous little backyard type wedding. It's spring and everything looks perfect. I greet her family and it's like I've turned up to a funeral, not a wedding. They're all extremely solemn, and when I ask about the groom her mother rolls her eyes and says this. It's a mistake. Wedding commences and as the bride comes down the aisle her face is grey and like she would rather be anywhere else. They exchange vows while the bride does everything in her power to not touch her husband-to-be, even standing a solid meter away from him as they stand at the front. She actually cringes and looks away when he gets choked up saying how much he loves her. When the priest announces the kiss the bride takes a slow step forward and presents her cheek for him to kiss instead of her lips. No one cheers, it's just an awkward shuffling of feet and a few scattered claps. It was the worst wedding I've ever been to. They lasted about 3 months before separating. Used to moonlight as a musician for hire in college and did more than a few weddings. Saw many that raised an eyebrow, but the 2 that really stood out as rough. Groom was super emotional and smiling when the bride first appeared at the church doors to walk down the aisle, and the bride was more interested in hollowing at her family and friends as she made her way down the aisle. I don't think she looked at the groom once on her way down. You just saw his face drop as she got closer and had no interest in even looking at the man she was about to marry. The other, I had heard from the wedding planner that the bride and her bridesmaids had gone through at least 10 bottles of champagne throughout the morning and all were ridiculously drunk. And to keep playing, no matter what happens, well, 2 of the 3 bridesmaids fell and had trouble getting up on the way down the aisle. The bride and the maid of honor made it down the aisle, but had great difficulty. The groom basically was holding the bride up for the entirety of the ceremony, and she very loudly refused a chair. Also the flower girl looked a little green around the gills and threw up into her basket during the vows. I guess she was either given or sneaked some champagne as well. Wedding planner said they had argued the night before over whether they were going to drink before the wedding. Groom wanted to stay sober until the reception. Bride disagreed. Ran into the planner at another wedding, and she said they had a massive fight in the limo on the way to take pictures, which the bride side of the wedding party was in no shape to participate in, so they skipped them. Photographer ended up doing a goofy shoot with the groomsmen, since they had already paid for photos. Bride and bridesmaids sat in the limo drinking more. Showed up to the reception, and the bride was passed out. Groom made an apology speech to the guests, and got an Uber home. Alone. On a nicer note, I was playing in a church that was not air conditioned, in the middle of August, and the bride passed out from the heat. Groom caught her, laid her down super gently, ran and got her chair, while someone got her some orange juice, and did the entire ceremony with her in the chair, and him on one knee next to her. Was super sweet, and she cried the entire time. Another time, someone actually did try to do the speak now or forever hold your peace, and the bride whips around, cuts the guy off, and says for the final time, "No, I never have, or never will want to be with you. Shut the fuck up, and let me get married." Kisses her groom on the cheek, and says cheerfully, "Now let's get married." Wasn't able to get any background details on that one though. I've been right a few times for sure. Photographer here. One groom was so full of himself, but did that whatever you want, my queen thing, where he wants to be seen as this great guy, but really he's a self-absorbed dick. He was a chef, and faking loved telling people that it was a quick engagement and marriage, and I got the feeling maybe too quick. The wedding and reception were to be at his parents' place, and his mom had a lot of input, as did his sister. The bride got shut down whenever she talked. On the day of the wedding, I arrived to shoot the bride getting ready. She is alone with the hair and makeup person. I initially thought that person was a friend, but she wasn't. Her bridesmaids were not there. 2 hours go by. She can't get a hold of them. The makeup person leaves. I help her put her veil on and do up her shoes. I'm feeling so bad for her, and also awkward as fuck. This is supposed to be her big day, and here is basically a stranger putting her veil on and telling her she looks great. Finally, the bridesmaids come in. The maid of honor is the groom's sister. When the bride questions them, the sister says they went out for breakfast. The bride asks why they wouldn't tell her or bring her food, and they get pissy, like she's being a Bridezilla. Then it comes out that the groom was invited for breakfast along with the groomsmen, and they all had started drinking. It's only 11:30 AM and the bridal party is half lit. The kicker? None of the bridesmaids are dressed or have their hair or makeup done. The wedding is in 30 minutes. I get 0 photos of the bridesmaids. I run to shoot the groomsmen. They are doing shots. I get some great photos of them because they are drunk and all dressed up and feeling great. Wedding happens, and that part is fine. We are supposed to go to a nearby beach and trail for photos. This never happens because the groom is literally talking to every person in attendance in the longest receiving line situation I have ever seen. He keeps drinking. The meal happens and takes forever. The sun is about to set. I tell the couple I literally have 0 photos of them alone together and we need to go. He says yeah. After the speeches, he gets up to speak after several of his friends and his sister do 10-minute speeches, and he goes on and on and on. Most of it has nothing to do with his new bride. 30 minutes into his speech and the sun has set. He finally finishes, and I approach the bride. She just looks at me, defeated, and says, "You can just go home now." Groom was in the middle of a group of people, chugging a beer and laughing loudly, while his beautiful new bride sat alone, seemingly wondering what the fuck she got herself into. I delivered the images and they didn't pay the remainder amount. I got a million excuses. After a month, I finally texted him and said I was going through small claims. The next day he sent an F with an angry message about hounding him and giving me a bad review. I saw her 6 months later at a restaurant, and before I could ask, she told me she left him. Saw him a few months ago working at a liquor store downtown. I guess being a chef didn't work out. A friend told me they know of him, and he got fired from 3 restaurants. He ignored me while he flirted hard with this woman. I shit you not, just before we left he said to her, "I'm off in 5 minutes. I'll walk with you to that store. I'll tell Charlie to put that delicious cab sauve aside for you." So smooth. Good luck, lady. I've performed over 3,500 weddings. I rarely keep track of my success record, because once they say I do and pay me, that's as far as our contract goes. With that being said, there's a stark contrast between couples who are a really good match and couples who I don't see spending the rest of their lives putting up with shit. The good couples are there for each other. They are each other's rocks. Their words toward each other are kind. Their words about one another when separated are loving, understanding, and empathetic. You can tell their lives have melded so completely that, when you talk to them separately before the ceremony, you sense something is missing from them. You see the completeness when they are standing together. Then there's the flip side of that coin. There's a groom who says unkind things but only joking. Like how she's always late, or how she's probably gabbing with her bridesmaids. The bride will likely berate her groom for not doing something, or for doing the right thing the wrong way. You can tell they may have been good friends, and maybe even good lovers. But lifelong partners? I see so many people go after their respective best friends after that first kiss instead of holding on to one another like life depended on it. If you spend the majority of your wedding day hanging out with your buds, I can't predict the future, but that isn't promising point. Lifelong partners must be unendingly kind to one another. I see so many people get into the trap of sarcasm. It's light and joking at first, but it always escalates. Sarcasm is a weed that will destroy relationships. If you find yourself getting into sarcasm with someone you love, and you want to keep them, identify it and end it immediately. Sarcasm replaces important communication, difficult talks you really need to have, and settle point. The best couples are the ones who are unafraid of being vulnerable with their feelings. They will tell me, almost like it's a secret, how weak and powerless they are in the face of the love they have for their soul. Wedding planner here. Where should I start? I have tons of stories, but this is the craziest one. I'm a destination wedding planner, so I usually plan everything by email and phone calls. I only meet the couple once they arrive to the destination about 4 days before the wedding point. The day they arrived I welcome them and let them rest. Our meeting was set for the next day. The next day comes and I'm waiting for them at my office. Have in mind I'm at the resort they are staying at, and I received a call from the receptionist. She is crying, and she is telling me how the groom's mom is crazy, telling me she locked her in her room because there was no premium wine brand in the freezer. That is definitely not included, and when the receptionist went to the room to try to calm her down she just locked her. I was just hearing this, and the bride crying a lot comes to my office, but the groom is nowhere to be seen. She says she hated her meal and that the groom is super drunk since the day before, so she couldn't convince him to be at the meeting. I ask her if she wants to try again later, and she says no. She is super sure about it, and we check the wedding plans together. They stated that they didn't want a rehearsal for the ceremony, so we just went to the venues to see everything. The groom show up at my office 5 hours later for the meeting drunk, so I explain that we already had it, and he left super mad. On the wedding day basically the bride cried for the entire morning just talking about how much she hated her meal and how she was super crazy. I knew this after the receptionist call. The resort even though about kicking her out, but she apologized and they let her stay. Bad idea. I checked everything like I always do. I'm a little sergeant when it comes to times and planning. At the time, we have everything set up and ready, and the groom is nowhere with the rest of his family and groomsmen. The bride is ready in her room with her bridesmaids and her family is at the venue, but we cannot start without the groom. 30 minutes later I found the groom. He was at another venue drunk and pissed because there was no setup for his wedding point. I took him to the real venue and we start the ceremony. The bride was crying the entire time and she was taking distance from him. He was super drunk and still pissed. After the ceremony he was telling me that it was my fault that he was like that, and his mom of course starts screaming like a banshee at me for the same reason. She was gesticulating a lot while screaming, and when the bride approached us to calm the situation she got hit by the mill and the mill didn't apologize. She actually told her it was her fault for being in a bad mood and that she deserved it. Fast forward to the dinner and the groom is even drunker and the bride is nowhere to be seen. I searched for her to try to help but nothing. I went back to the dinner. 30 minutes later I ask the hotel staff about the bride and if someone has seen her, and they tell me to go to the front desk. I go there thinking that she might be in the lobby, but no, she left. She actually left the resort on her wedding night and the next day she flew back home. The groom and his family was pissed, and somehow all of this was the resort's fault. They were mad. They ask for a refund after the bride told the groom she wanted the divorce the next day by phone, and they said all was because she didn't like the wedding. 2 months later they are divorced, and the bride pressed charges against the mill because in the divorce hearing she attacked her edit. Sorry for the format, I'm on mobile, and also English is not my first language. Oh yes. Right off the bat, what should have tipped me off was that the groom's last name translated to literally dick. His bride was the definition of a Bridezilla, forcing us to make accommodations on things we do as free courtesies that aren't actually paid for, or at all included in the package she got. She got it in the end, but not before she made my life hell for a week, while I was temping in the office. For her tasting, we had her table set up in our ballroom along with the tables of 4 other couples, all coming in at different times. My sister was her coordinator. I was the butler on staff that day. This woman stole some flowers off another couple's table, then got mad when I took them from her table and put them back. Then she and her husband started running their mouths to their coordinator, who they loved and didn't know was my sister, about how I tried to tell them no and enforce company policy. How dare I do my job? My sister clapped them back by calling me over and introducing me as her baby sister. They immediately stammered out an apology. From there, it was mostly smooth sailing for me. But the reason we knew they were headed for a divorce was that the bride got wasted at her tasting, because lol it's free, and I want to know everything on your bar's menu. Within an hour, the trips to the bathroom started. Each time she went, the groom would not just flirt, but aggressively hit on every woman in the ballroom. Point day of the wedding comes around. The groom got into a fight with a groomsman that shattered one of our glass doors that led into the courtyard. The bride got drunk and spent most of the night crying in the bathroom. The groom ended up hooking up with a bridesmaid in the limo, where he was caught by his mother, which apparently is what started the fight with his groomsman. It was a shit show. They didn't even last the full honeymoon. The bride and her mother came back 3 days later demanding a refund because they were getting the marriage annulled. It was a bit late to this party, but I played in a wedding band for several years. A wedding we played was being held at a farm and we were provided a green room / space to change, which was one of 2 small rooms built into the side of a barn. Point after the first set was finished, we and a few of the guests all head back to this barn to hang out. Once we are inside, we can clearly hear 2 people having sex in the other barn room. Point we all think it's funny as hell and start making all sorts of noise to let the couple know that we are there. The such noises stop immediately, but nothing else happens for a while and we all think it's just an embarrassed couple sorting themselves out and bracing for the walk of shame. 20 minutes goes by and still nothing, so one of the guests knocks on the door to ask if everything is alright. The door opens and the best man, who is married, appears and literally bolts out of the barn as fast as he can with his jacket over his head to try and hide his face. Then a few seconds later, the bride walks out and starts crying her eyes out. Turns out they'd been sleeping together behind the groom's back for quite a while. Point the groom got wind of it. There was a lot of shouting and then not sure what happened afterwards. We just packed down and got the hell out of there. Point then, strangely, a few years later we got an inquiry from the bride and best man to play their wedding at the same venue. Another one, I'm a photographer. Wedding was at a military venue. Massive wedding. Must have been 300 people there. Everyone who spoke was in the military. His co got up and spoke. Everything was about the groom. And his mother was in charge of everything. Point the bride was younger and was pregnant with twins. She was in her 3rd year of university. I found out they had hooked up, kind of started dating, then found out she was pregnant and he proposed. The groom ignored her all night. I kept trying to get photos of them and she literally couldn't find him. He was nearly sheet-faced by the time we got an opportunity. I posed them on some stairs and then the bride asked me to fake the first waltz. Why? Because she was worried her new husband would be passed out by the time the real one came around. Point I overheard her maid of honor telling her something like, "This whole day hasn't been about you. And where is he? Why isn't he with you right now? You deserve better." She did deserve better. I awkwardly went to shoot the twins. After they were born, they had booked me while booking the wedding, so I was on standby for the next few months until they were born. When I arrived, the groom said something like, "Oh, I forgot that blanket at my place." I looked and neither of them were wearing their wedding rings. So there's stats about how high cost weddings are more likely to end in divorce and all. I worked at a florist, and the typical wedding suite was just a bride's bouquet, bridesmaid flowers, boutonnieres for the guys, and a few arrangements. We were not a cheap place to get flowers, and our designer was amazing with a well-deserved reputation, so even basic wedding suites were pretty pricey. Well, sometimes people would come through and have this huge spray for the altar, enormous pillar arrangements for the sides, flowers on the end of each row of seats, flowers for the cake, flowers for the reception tables, and so on and so on. Even the smaller weddings were furnished tended to be expensive affairs, so those big old weddings were freaking opulent. It was bad form to joke about or anything, but I always had a little teasing of these people are doomed with those expensive wedding stats in the back of my mind. One day one of those over-the-top opulent weddings was for a pair of 18-year-olds. Another high divorce rate kinda switches. The wedding was all freaking out. We are talking they had design consultants select the tone of muted pastel for each bridesmaid's dress, and they looked kind of like Greek muses. Flowers in the hair, flowers everywhere we could stick them. Everyone involved looked like a model. The photos from this thing were absolutely stunning. The colors so well done it looked like it had a dang filter on. But yeah, in most weddings I went to during the setup stage, the bride isn't dressed yet and is running around possibly Bridezillas or whatever, and the groom is sometimes there too. Usually it's all sappy excited couple stuff, sometimes a little snapping back and forth, but these two barely talked to each other and seemed really standoffish. Like yeah, weddings are stressful, but their behavior was definitely atypical for what I usually saw. Just the contrast of the decadence and beauty of everything, and the pair themselves having the least chemistry I've ever seen in a couple. While I was working, they had a lot of stat disadvantages with the high cost wedding and young age, and when I saw how they behaved, I just kinda went cheat yeah, this ain't gonna last. Save the pictures. Not an industry worker, but I've seen some sheet as a guest point was filming a wedding. I guess this counts as worker, at a small redneck country club in southern Iowa. Things were going fairly smooth, until it came time for toasts. Best man stands up, and proceeds to give a speech about how he lived with the bride first, and that they had special times, and he believes she still has a blanket of his traveled to Illinois for a wedding of a friend. Go out the night before for a bachelor/bachelorette dual party. Bride and groom get into a huge drunken argument on the way back to the hotel. Argument spills out into the parking lot. The bride hurls the engagement ring into the nearby woods. My wife and I retreated to our rooms to get away from the disaster. The rest of the wedding party spent the night combing the woods looking for the ring point, attend a friend's wedding, and make it to the reception at a local lodge that they rented. Groom loses his drunken mind over something and proceeds to destroy the kitchen, punching cabinets and overturning equipment. I go in to try and calm him down. He headbutts in the face, so I knock him out. I go out and collect my wife and kids, and we head for the car. As we are driving out of the parking lot we pass him, now awake and shirtless, and dripping blood and sweat, screaming and flailing around the front of the lodge as his new bride and 2 children from a previous marriage wail and cry as they look on point. All 3 of these marriages ended in divorce, as well as mine. I spent a number of years as an officiant that specialized in contentious weddings. Things like a couple who wanted a secular wedding, but their parents were very religious, or who wanted a religious wedding, but the families were of very different religious backgrounds, or non-straight couples who were trying to navigate family trying to be supportive, but having some homophobia. I would always have 2-hour-long appointments with the betrothed, one that's the two together, and one that's split, so I get half an hour with each separately. The purpose was to make sure the couple was on the same page, and that I understood the concerns and needs completely. The effect was that I turned down a lot of she-chows where the contentiousness of the wedding was really that the couple had no chance in hell, at least without some serious counseling. To that stand out, the groom confessed in his private session with me that he was actually in love with his betrothed sister, but she was married, and his goal in the marriage was to be join the sister's family so he could see her more. I had a very frank conversation with him, and note the fact out. The couple seemed like a lot of fun in their joint session. They wanted a nerdy, whimsical theme, seemed genuinely enthused, and the main worry was that groom A's family was a little snobby and would not support this plan. I can work with that. In the separate session, groom B explained that he didn't want any of that and would much prefer a traditional wedding, and could I work in some traditional components. That's a pretty big disconnect, so I met with them together once more to see if we could get on the same page, which ended with me calling the cops after groom A threw my end table at groom B. Basically, the main indicator of this will not end well in my experience is that the couple isn't able to be completely open with each other. If you're planning a wedding and you don't feel able to tell your partner how you really feel or what you really want, you aren't ready to get married. My older sister married a dude twice her age, and he was a known cokehead and dabbled in what is known as drug trafficking. Sister is a pill addict. The wedding was in a field in the middle of nowhere. I'm probably 9 or 10. My grandma drove me and my brothers. Grandma knew this wedding was a terrible idea. I don't remember the ceremony at all, but remember not wanting to leave because shit was about to go down. Everyone except my grandma was off there as drunk, including my mom. Grandma bribed me saying we'll go get KFC. In the car I go lol afterwards, and she always brings it up. My mom told the story how my sister, her husband, and my mom were in a car. They were driving her home. She was completely drunk, telling him he's a piece of shit and the marriage was a bad idea. Just laying into him. The marriage lasted way longer than anyone thought, but it was not at all a happy marriage. They ended up with 2 kids. One now has her own kid and is constantly in legal trouble. The husband ended up cheating on my sister, going to prison a few times for selling drugs, and told to leave the state because he ratted out supposed cartel members. He died of pancreatic cancer recently. They ended up divorced after a few years. I don't have contact with my sister or her kids. No idea if anyone is in jail or not. I'm assuming so. I paid my way through university as a wedding musician. What follows is the partial tale of the wedding that broke me. I have never done another. The mother of the groom had insisted on singing a solo as it was her day too. She had chosen Avenue Mariah, and I was to accompany her on piano. This is not a song I would recommend for an inexperienced vocalist, as it requires decent breath control and dynamic vocal range. This woman had been told her whole life that she sang like an angel and was a frequent performer at the local karaoke evenings. The first time we were able to get together to practice was 2 days before the wedding. Within a minute my alarm bells were going off. Her son was there as moral support and had left the fiancé in the car. When the mother started singing, it was immediately obvious that not only had she never sung Avenue Mariah before, she had never actually sung any song ever. To put it bluntly, she could not sing. She insisted that the arrangement simply wasn't in her vocal range. I lowered it to a register she thought she could handle, but it was a very difficult key for me to play, and it took me a minute to adjust, so she started screaming at me about being unprofessional and burst into hysterical sobs, to the point the son had to catch her as she went into an exaggerated swoon. When I suggested a different song, she screamed at me that as an accompanist I was supposed to make her sound good, declared the day was ruined, and ran out of the church. The next day she agreed to return and try again, but this was the day of the main rehearsal. Any music practice typically does not take place during this time, as the logistics of moving a wedding party through the motions is quite complicated and can take time to get right. This woman took the entire time slot trying to learn how to sing. The son spent the time trying to inflate her ego and telling her how lovely she sounded. The fiancé meanwhile sat silently in the back. Finally I could tell everyone was getting frustrated, so I stepped out of my strictly designated role as accompanist to try to give her some on-the-spot voice lessons. In the process I demonstrated by singing the opening phrase. The woman literally stomped her foot like a toddler and screamed at me for trying to upstage her and steal her solo. The son handled it by telling her how much better than me she sounded and how much of a beach I was for trying to show her up. I'm paraphrasing here. I would never let anyone get away with calling me a beach for any amount of money. The actual wedding rehearsal never happened, and she never got all the way through the song. The day of the wedding, 10 minutes before the appointed start of the ceremony, she interrupts me as I'm performing the filler music while guests are arriving, but before anything has started, she tries to insist I go into a back room and practice with her. I decline as politely as I'm able, indicating the people that are coming in. She storms off in a huff, and the groom runs after her. He spends so long soothing her the ceremony starts 40 minutes late. When her time finally comes, she refuses to go up to sing, causing a huge scene and flying off the handle about how everyone just wants to see her fail and that the bride would just love that. She stormed out a final time, so I just played the instrumental, although I was very tempted to sing it as a final foo to the mother. I heard through the grapevine that the bride never actually moved in with her new husband and the marriage was annulled some short time later. The groom yelled at me about the location, museum event coordinator, not a wedding planner. He yelled at me because he basically had to get ready, put his belt, tie, and jacket on in a pilot ready room. Basically a really large room with chairs and flight suits. He wanted to take get ready pics. He was pissed that it wasn't in something similar to the bridal room. His bride was the one who'd said it would be fine, and she wanted him as far as possible, so he didn't see her. He screams at me. He wants a refund for the whole space rental. I informed him that wouldn't happen as stipulated in the contract. We are a non-profit museum and wouldn't return anything for any reason. Even after the ceremony took place, he'd find me throughout the evening to bitch and complain. He kept trying to speak with my supervisor. I didn't have one, other than giving him the museum's director's phone number, which he never does. He was sole. Honestly, if he'd been nice, I would have tried to give him a free plane ride in one of our warbids or something to make him feel better. Rides $500 to $1,900, but no. I could help but think of how this whole marriage was doomed. If it were me, and I saw my groom acting like a child having a fit and harassing another woman that way, I'd have called it off. Big red flag. He threatened my job, my future job, and took me to court. Used every curse word under the sun and repeatedly called a cunt. I just smiled and kept repeating, you signed a contract. If you don't stop harassing me, I will kick you and your guest out. I didn't, but should have. So I was a church acolyte at a very awkward 14 years old. I had come to the wedding rehearsal because this couple was just so far off the chain. They wanted extra candles for these specifically extra blessings, and pastor was like, okay, let's have an acolyte at the rehearsal. So I'm their point, except, no, the bride and groom were not off the chain. They seemed remarkably chill, kept holding hands and quietly talking to one another, and seemed fairly snuggly. They were church members. The bride taught Sunday school part-time. The groom co-taught her class. They had been dating for ages. We kids knew them. They were adorable. They had a rescue puppy together, and the best part of the Reformation Sunday picnic had involved their puppy sitting quietly next to their 4th graders and listening to the lesson, just ever so well behaved and cute as a bag of buttons. He was a school science teacher. She taught math. They were poor, but not direly so, and they clearly had a whole life ready to begin together, their bloody mothers. On the other hand, mother of the bride would suggest this, and immediately mother of the groom had to top it with that. Mot B would make a crack about money, Mot G would make a crack about tradition. The actual couple involved would just look at one another and roll their eyes. These two older women just got progressively worse and worse. And keep in mind, I'm a 14-year-old kid at this point, wearing a white robe with a hood and a rope belt, and carrying a big combination candle lighter and snuffer stick one could theoretically use to kill Draculas, it being a blessed item in the service of God and all. And I could tell this was some crazy sheet right here. Pastor's divine gift of patience was wearing thin. And he finally suggested that maybe Mod B should go and ascertain some detail about the floral arrangements for the day, while Mod G checked up on the catering, so that he could discuss some of the important and very private theology of the sacrament with the couple. The mothers scurried off to outdo one another. As Pastor had hoped they would. The couple seemed to visibly relax. Pastor talked with them for a bit, and as suspected, they didn't care about any of it. Flowers? Who cares? There are yellow ones on the lawn where the kids were making dandelion wishes. Those count. Catering? Subway or Domino's would do, so long as people are fed. We don't care. The extra blessings? Yeah, my mom asked for this, and then my mom wanted that, and yeah, they didn't care half a heck for a bit of it. They wanted two things. To be married to each other. In their faith, where they had been so happy. So pastor, who was a wise old fellow, who had officiated for my own parents, smiled. Dearly beloved, may I recommend a wonderful church, also in our faith, in Atlantic City? I can have a colleague from Divinity School waiting to perform the service. I'll make all your excuses for you, and with the event insurance, there shouldn't be any problem securing refunds. And we'll have a reception for you after Sunday service, to your tastes. When you get back, the couple had apparently been in religious premarital counseling with pastor for over a year, and the only problem was their mothers. He had tended to doubt it a little, but upon seeing the truth and hearing from the women who ran the church's wedding and reception side just how insane these two mothers were, really, it was like Bet and Joan had their kids pair off. He very sensibly, and with the wisdom of Solomon, called up a buddy from Pastor College and organized a beautiful elopement, plus, by having a reception after services. They got to have all their Sunday school kids there, whom the mothers hadn't wanted to invite at all, preferring their own business friends and people who would appreciate the open bar. Neither bride or groom liked to drink, and then pastor and I did some stuff I shan't bore you with, which meant I was officially retired from acolyte at bloody last. Most acolytes quit at 13, but we had been short of kids who weren't actively pious or too short to reach, but the couple did get their deposits back, and I incidentally got promoted to communion server the same day I got confirmed, which made my grandma just absurdly happy, and she lauded that over both the mother of the bride and the groom's mother for simply weeks. The happy couple also booked a particular 16-year-old, not either of their mothers, to babysit their first human baby a couple years later, and I had enough younger siblings and little cousins to keep them and sitters for simply ages. They celebrate their 20-year anniversary this July. The mothers have both retired to Florida, and, inexplicably, are close neighbors down there. I wish them everything they deserve. This wedding I photographed was probably one of the worst I ever did. The groom was super cold and not friendly, apparently hated having his photo taken. Fine, but he was fairly aggressive about it. There was a kid in the wedding party, which I later found out was his kid, but I had no idea cause he didn't act like it. Anyways, after the ceremony we went to start taking the bride plus groom photos, but he refused to put his beer down. He literally held it behind his back in every photo. We got through 10 minutes before he started getting really huffy, so the bride said we'll try some more later. After some time passes, the bride grabs us to take sunset photos, no beer in hand. Everything is good for about 5 minutes, and then he gets angry. I'm really nasty and angry. He got in the bride's face and said, "You women and you're faking pictures," and then stormed off. We were all stunned. The bride tried to laugh it off, but it was very uncomfortable, and personally I was really concerned for her. They all got really drunk and hardly interacted with each other all night. Their planned bubble exit didn't happen. Later the bride was so upset she hardly had any photos. He also had cancelled their engagement session prior to the wedding that was included. She tried to get a refund for the whole thing. Worked at the Ritz in New York City as an event coordinator for 3 years. I'm not in the wedding industry, but have managed a bunch of weddings in that time. A lot of on-paper marriages, where the couples got married for convenience. Largely typical stuff, but the best stories. Oil tycoon's gay son marries mining company's lesbian daughter. Strict rules from the hotel staff to no talk to the bride or groom at any point. Talking with the wedding planner after the reception, it turns out they're both doing it to lock in their trust fund. They have an arrangement that they live separate lives and only meet together 3 times in the year, one for wedding anniversary, one for holidays, and one for impromptu events needed by parents. The wedding anniversary and holidays was purely for a photo op. Social media. Wall Street broker gets married to high school sweetheart. Everything seems normal. During the break between the wedding and reception, he takes photos and then retires to his groomsman's suite. Reception starts. Groom is 2 hours late. Turns out he hired a prostitute and got drunk/hires a last hurrah. The bride was fuming mad the entire reception and all the speeches were cancelled. Or the one time that days before the wedding was to take place, the bride and groom discovered they were cousins. They tried to cancel the wedding while getting their deposit back, which is not going to happen without a penalty. They ended up owning up to why they were canceling, so that's the only reason I know about it. It could have been a lie, but they still didn't get their full payment back. I'm a videographer, and for some reason every time I work with this one photographer, the couple ends up divorced. The photographer is really good at her job and super sweet. It's just one of those weird coincidences. The worst one was a couple who had first gotten together in high school before he cheated on her and got someone else pregnant. Let me clarify, she was in 7th grade, Molly, and he was a 19-year-old senior, Steve. He got a different middle school girl pregnant the following year. He'd been held back twice by this point and was 20. They broke up. She meets a nice guy, Bob, in 12th grade, and the two were together for a while, 10 years. After she broke up with Steve, he shows back up, and they start an affair. Molly and Bob were living together and engaged at the time. Molly leaves Bob, and they use some of the wedding plans and deposits to get married to Steve in only a few months. Now the only reason I know all this is because the groom did a 20-minute speech detailing how they beat all the odds and ended up together. Even admonished his new in-laws for trying to keep them apart when they got the police involved for statutory rape charges. It was the most uncomfortable reception of all time. Who brings up infidelity in their own wedding toast? They split up 3 months after the wedding. Steve was on multiple dating sites and promised Molly he'd get off of them once they got married, and he knew she wouldn't leave him again. Close bracket. However, he ended up impregnating a different girl and told Molly she wouldn't be upset if she just agreed to have a baby at the same time. Thankfully she turned him down. They've been divorced now for 6 years. Molly grew a lot from the experience. We became Facebook friends. She went to counseling and made amends with Bob, although they didn't get back together. She is focusing on her career, although she has been dating someone for the last few years. I really wish her all the best. What's weird was 3 years later Steve contacted me about the wedding video. He had never paid the final payment and still owed $300, but when they split up they just decided not to pay or get their video. He asked if he could have it because of all the good memories. I asked Molly if she was okay with that because the guy was a creep. She didn't care as long as he paid me for it. It was originally his wedding gift to her. So the guy paid me, and 3 years after his divorce he got his wedding video. It wasn't as nice as my usual stuff, but I did include his entire speech with the hope he'd reflect on his behavior. I had a friend who was a wedding videographer for several years and often helped him out when he had a staff shortage. To answer the question, we often would talk at the end of some nights when we thought it was clear that couples weren't going to last or were obviously mismatched. It wasn't ever the same things, but you'd start to see differences between couples who genuinely seemed to enjoy each other's company or have an interpersonal ease, vs those who always seemed to be at odds, looking for reasons to avoid each other, rather spending time with family or friends. One constantly haranguing the other, reactions to each other out of line with what was going on at the time, extreme selfishness or tactlessness. There were nights we would have bet money that the marriage wouldn't last the year. That being said, weddings are weird, stressful times, so you never know how representative of the rest of a life they will end up being. To chip in with my favorite gonzo wedding story, I once shot a wedding where the groom was allegedly involved in the drug trade. He was in his very early 20s and spent the most insane amount of money I've ever seen on a wedding. It was like they just went down the "what extras do you want" list at the venue and checked every box, regardless if it made any kind of cohesive sense. Every possible type of food: pizza bar, sundae bar, raw oysters, poutine bar, traditional Chinese 8-course dinner, ice sculptors, fire breathers, musicians, magicians, belly dancers, multiple DJs, and on and on. It was a complete jumble of styles and tones and noise, more like a wedding industry trade show than a wedding. Every guest got their own personalized bottle of high-end cognac, with additional bottles at each table. The groom and the groom's mother were both so drunk half an hour into dinner they were both violently throwing up. Apparently the washroom was such a disaster, the venue just declared it unsalvageable and locked it for the rest of the evening. Both the groom and his mother were taken somewhere, home, a hospital, and the bride didn't even seem to notice, partying the rest of the night away entirely by herself. French here. English is not my mother tongue. A friend of mine used to work in a large leisure complex with pool, horse ride, and a restaurant. He was the manager of the restaurant and had many wedding in April to June. Once he met a couple about to marry. And it smells strange from the beginning. Very young and childish people looking for a fairytale event, even if he understood they were short of money. My friend felt like they were completely lost in their life and their couple was not that solid. He offered them to make the wedding later in the year. He knows his restaurant is booked all spring long. He hoped this couple would split if they had to last a bit longer before this wedding, but they told him they want this wedding on this date because they were part of a TV program who can't wait. This kind of TV shows where several couples invite each other to their wedding. Everyone gives notes, and at the end, the couple with the best wedding has a gift. So the main thing was about being on TV. The day came, and the couple spent the entire day with the TV crew as friends. One guy with the camera, one journalist who met the other couples like every hour. This dinner is she THMM. And what about her poor dress? The couple of the day thought they may become stars. They didn't care about being married, sharing this moment with family and friends. My friend doesn't know how it goes for them after this, but what can you expect? My husband and I were the couple that wedding vendors thought would end up divorced. Lol. The gist of it was that we decided to get married almost straight out of college for health insurance reasons, and so we didn't have money for a wedding planner, which meant that I had to plan out the whole thing myself. He didn't really care what the details were, as long as we stuck to our budget. I'm introverted and timid by nature, so having to schedule meetings with vendors and venues around my work hours was a nightmare, and I compromised on things way more than I should have. A few months before the wedding, I was completely stressed and drained, since I wasn't liking how anything was turning out, but all the deposits were non-refundable by that point. My husband started pestering me about the costs, even though I kept it all within the budget, and he still didn't want to help with the actual planning. The guest list made me realize how few real friends I actually had, as only a little over half asked after I had attended all of their weddings, and only a third of them actually showed up. To top it off, the night before the wedding I was staying with my parents at a hotel near the venue. Since we had to get up early to decorate before the ceremony, the venue wouldn't let us decorate any earlier than the day of, and I woke up to a call in the middle of the night from my husband, who needed me to drive over an hour to our apartment and rescue him, after he had erotically chained himself on the living room floor and couldn't reach the key on top of the fridge. So I had to go and do that, and found the apartment a complete mess because he had gone all out on a bondage bender all by himself, and it was already dawn by the time I got back to the hotel. The day of the wedding, I was pissed, but didn't want to make a scene, so I just went through it completely stone-faced and quiet. There was clear tension in the air when my husband and I said our vows. We barely interacted with each other through the ceremony and reception. I looked terrible in all the photos, even though I didn't cry, and the number of guests was so dismal for the venue size. 40 out of the expected 120 came, that the catering people felt bad and let everyone bring home containers of leftovers, even though that wasn't usually their policy. My husband and I just looked so miserable the entire day that I'm pretty sure the venue coordinator, chaplain, photographer, harpist, DJ, bartender, and everyone else in attendance thought we wouldn't make it 6 months. Oddly enough, we'll be celebrating 9 years of marriage this summer. My wedding was the worst wedding I had ever been to. It's not even one of those things that I can look back on and laugh about, and if I could do it over I'd just choose to elope, but my husband and I have managed to stick together so far. That period of time was just a crappy blip in what's been a pretty solid partnership otherwise. Bartender for several weddings. It always felt like the less extravagant the affair, the happier the couples always seemed. One particular wedding I tell everyone about, I was booked for the rehearsal dinner and dinner service. I only dealt with the wedding planner up until this point. Upon meeting them, she was like 24, 6 feet 0 tall and extremely attractive. He was like 45 to 50, 5 feet 7 and a balding chubby type. As I was setting up, she would constantly come over to talk to me. Like if this woman wasn't getting married, I'd assume she was hitting on me. Of the 3 hours I was at the rehearsal, she was at my table for over 2 hours. The ceremony went well, and the wedding planner told me seating was a nightmare. There were over 200 guests, but the groom's side only had like 20. He owned several businesses in town and you could tell he had money. But all his guests were older and had this look of sadness all day. She kept ordering lemon drop martinis, pounded like 10 of them, while he had maybe 2 beers. Everything wraps up, and I'm packing up. He comes over to me and gives me an envelope for payment. $2,000 in $100 is way more than I was owed. I head to the elevator and hear my name being screamed. The bride wanted to thank me. I said it was a pleasure and she gave me a hug. I feel her start licking my neck. She kisses my cheek and leans in to kiss my lips. I backed off like, whoa, as a bunch of her friends got her off. One of them just rolled their eyes at me. I take my money and get the hell out of there. Around 1 AM I'm getting bombarded with texts. The bride and one of her friends keep asking me to come join them at a nightclub. I explain, you literally just got married. She says her husband is already asleep and doesn't care. I just laughed it off and stayed home. A few months later she found me on Facebook and her profile read as single and no pictures were around for her husband. I've worked weddings most of my career, which is about 15-ish years. Most of the time, when there's a Bridezilla, which is less common now than say 10 years ago, and or a controlling bride or groom, the thought does cross my mind. Also, the more money they spend on pointless stuff, the worse. However, one particular wedding I worked stuck out most of all. The bride was a Bridezilla and super controlling, and by far the most expensive and large wedding we have had there. I worked at a hotel, where you see modest to slightly expensive weddings but nothing like this. Top shelf booze, top shelf food, top shelf flowers, ice sculpture, chocolate fountain, cookie tables, candy tables, musicians for cocktail time and dinner, DJ. Bride had multiple dresses, rented chairs, rented linen. I'm sure there's more I'm forgetting, but to sum it up, the average wedding there cost 15-25k for 300-ish people, not including the services we didn't provide. They spent over 50k on the hotel services alone, so I'd venture they spent at least 100k or so. Which again for that hotel is incredibly dumb. If you can afford all that. The couple divorced from what I heard in about 7 months. No one I worked with was surprised. So basically, Bridezilla plus already miserable groom plus way overly spending plus inviting way too many people equals divorce. Grooms can be dicks and controlling too, don't get me wrong. It's just rare, because most of the time the groom is barely involved in the process leading up to the day. I work in a fancy hotel that does a lot of high-end weddings. At the time of this particular incident I was dating a bartender that works at a local restaurant, and I'll admit she was quite an attractive lady. One night I picked her up from work, and she told me a story about one of her regulars. You will not believe what so and so did tonight. He came to the bar and had a couple drinks and said, I have to ask you a question. See, I'm getting married tomorrow, and before I do I just need to know if I have a chance with you. Needless to say my girlfriend was quite offended. The next day I go to work, and the first thing the boss asks me is to bring a Tylenol to the groom in the ballroom as he has a headache. I get the Tylenol and a glass of water on a tray and head into the ballroom, and there is the groom seated on the far side of the room with his head down, obviously hungover. As I approach, and he lifts his head. It's so and so. I know him, and he knows who I am. I worked at this man's 300+ person wedding knowing he was at the bar the night before, asking my girlfriend if he had a chance. Could also tell the bride was not happy with his hungover state, however she put on a good face. As someone who works weddings you get to see the behind the scenes and how they act in private rooms and then in front of their guests, and let's just say the bigger the wedding the bigger the drama. This is more of a sad/tragic story. So you've been warned. Lexington, Kentucky, on the property of a famous horse racing track called Keeneland, which is across from the Bluegrass Airport. Bride and groom have this most amazing and beautiful fairytale wedding. She is brought to the ceremony in a white horse-drawn carriage, or 3 or 4 string orchestra, can't remember, playing. I think It's a Small World. I'm one of 3 videographers. Although, I'm one of the main ones. The bride's family are from my old hometown, which is south of Lexington. And it was so great seeing one of my high school teachers who had been invited. The wedding was fantastic. Both sides of the family are just the nicest of people. Bride was the baby of the family and dad was very well off. Both bridegroom had met at a Kentucky Christian college. He played baseball. Now the sad part. They left early the next morning and boarded a small commuter plane along with quite a few people that were from the same small town. Coincidence? The plane that took off on the wrong lane crashed into the farm next door and caught fire. Everyone died but the co-pilot, who was rescued by airport security/police. We were asked by the family to film the funeral, and the same horse-drawn carriage followed the hearse. They were placed in one coffin because they were embracing when they died. I couldn't stop hugging and crying with my grandparents. The guy I worked with for filming weddings basically tried to control how I behaved. I told him that he was in my goddamn hometown. I reminded him he bullied me into filming the funeral. His authority ended the minute I put his camera and his case in his car. And not only that, but I knew the grandparents. This tragedy was a local tragedy that affected me as well. So, here's the other unfortunate side with the photographer, who I knew well. We ended up working at a lot of the same weddings. The mother of the bride just lost herself in grief. My photographer buddy finally had to tell her that all the edits she continuously wanted at first was for her daughter, then it just became all about wanting edits for herself. So he just completed the wedding book and sent it to her as it declined all her attempts to contact him. While on the other side, the grieving mother of the groom accepted her copy of the wedding book without any requests to edit him or herself. Was just the sweetest. This was the Come Air Flight 5191, August 2006. The one I called with the most accuracy was one I didn't even do myself. I'm photographer. I edited engagement photos for the same couple photographed by two different photographers. The bride didn't like the first set, which I chalked up to that photographer not being the greatest. Not bad, just not amazing. I stopped working for that studio and got a nice boost in pay by moving to another. Lo and behold, my very first editing assignment is that same couple. I tell the new guy that I've edited engagement photos of them before, and he tells me that she came to him talking about how her fiancé looked terrible in the other photos. He didn't, and that she knows he's better looking than that, so she just had to change photographers. Well, these photos were nicer, so she stuck it out through the wedding with this studio. When I was editing the photos, she had all these notes about fixing him in the photos. I chuckled out loud to the photographer, they won't last a year. 8 months later, divorce. He got sick of her shit and skipped town. Sent divorce papers in the mail. She still had a deposit down for her wedding album that they never put together, and ended up doing a photo shoot with some nieces and nephews. I only talked to her once, but she sounded like a nice person. There are other stories. A couple that was fighting by the end of the reception. One where the dude confessed to her parents that he had been living this crazy party lifestyle and that she should get tested. They never made it to the wedding, so I don't count that one. And one where they stiffed me on the bill and I put a hex on them. Okay, in reality she lost a ton of weight. They were both heavier and decided to move on from him. My sister's wedding, which I was invited to by my mom. My sister and I don't get along because I hate her soon-to-be ex-husband. I show up, and they have not hired anyone to prepare or serve food, or do pretty much anything. It's 105°F in the shade in Texas and they're having an outdoor wedding. The groom's dad was supposed to provide the main course of brisket because he wanted to, and offered it as a gift for 100 guests, while my parents paid for everything else. No arrangements are set up, just flowers in bags on the floor in the kitchen area. I have a background in catering. Chewbacca 444, could you please help? You're the only one with experience with this kind of thing, my mother asks. I agree because my mom asked nicely and enlists my kids to start cutting flowers and plopping them into mason jars of water and then putting them on tables. Then I start preparing all of the sides. Luckily the venue has a professional kitchen, so not that bad. Just annoying that I'm doing it in a dress and flip-flops. I took off the damn heels when I'm supposed to be a guest. I get everything done in record time and get out to the logs that have been arranged for everyone to sit outside in the sun for the wedding, and we wait and wait and wait. The groom is nowhere to be found. My sister, who just recently had his baby, is now breastfeeding the baby in her wedding dress in the kitchen. He finally shows up so wasted he can barely walk. His buddy takes him to the bathroom to perk him up, and he literally smoked some meth. The wedding sermon was long and terrible. When it's finally over, everyone goes inside to eat, and the act has stopped working, and there's no brisket. Why? Because the groom's dad just started cooking it a few hours before the wedding. So everyone starts drinking. There are fist fights. My sister, who is breastfeeding, does a keg stand in her wedding dress. Finally the groom's dad brings in the brisket saying it's done enough. And I'm expected to carve it, of course. It's the chewiest, most bland abomination of brisket I've ever tasted. Horrible. But people still eat it, because that's all we have. We quickly run out, and I go ask the groom's dad to bring in the rest to serve. The rest? That's it. This man bought 2 medium-sized briskets for 100 people and that's it. No joke. Everyone finally decides they are tired of the shit show and being hot and go home. The groom leaves with his friends instead of my sister. My sister goes home and leaves me and my parents to clean up the whole mess 2 years and 2 more babies later, and she's finally divorcing him. We still don't get along, and the only pics of me at the wedding are of me preparing food and serving it because I wasn't invited to be in the wedding party family pics at all. Short but memorable. A few years ago we went to my first cousin's wedding. We had been close growing up, but not so much after high school, so I was excited to go and meet her new husband and introduce her to my children and husband. It was an afternoon wedding in a beautiful Victorian house with a massive hall and multiple wings. We showed up about an hour before to help my grandma get situated and visit. Also cocktail hour. This was years ago, BC, before COVID, so there were about 250 people there. My cousin is a gorgeous soft-spoken and somewhat timid girl, so it was a bit surprising when her future husband was a bit scraggly with a greasy porn stash and crazy eyes. I can't even describe them properly. He was in our faces, including my poor mild-mannered grandmother, loud, drunk off his ass, and somehow including multiple F-bombs in his introductions to each of us, including my toddler and 6-year-old. Lol, I have no issue with cussing, but as a first impression it wasn't so great. Pretty sure he was tripping at the time, with a splash of coke to keep him upright. He would start out staring at us, and then his eyes would ever so slowly drift to the ceiling, or past the person he was trying to address. While trying to maintain eye contact he was waving his arms about in a slalassu type motion. Right off the bat, bizarre. Then the ceremony. His best man held him up a bit as my cousin walked down the aisle. His eyes started out gazing into hers, then back up to the ceiling again. She gave heartfelt and beautiful vows, talked about how he was her heart, her soulmate, very loving and sincere in my opinion. Then it's his turn. The officiant had to ask him to begin twice, and he finally noticed, and after a long pause he looked at her and said, "You're so faking hot," while giggling uncontrollably into the mic. There was an audible gasp from several elderly family members. Thankfully our grandma is very hard of hearing, so she just clapped a bit and turned to whisper how wonderful this ceremony was. With tears in her eyes, my cousin didn't really react. The vows were over at that point, and they kissed, and the night continued. At the reception he disappeared after a bit, probably passed out somewhere. They lasted 5 months. But he was traveling for most of that and spouse. He was actually in a fairly well-known band at that time. Still is as far as I know. But he loved his drugs more than anything. Not sure how they met or got to the point of marriage. But she's happy now, and he's probably constantly staring at someone's ceiling singing to himself. Edit. Oops, sorry. Opus. Not in the wedding industry. Although I have been ordained and done a few ceremonies for close friends. None of which were mistakes. Short answer, my sister and I both worked for the same hotel company, but in different cities, she in Toronto and I in Halifax. My sister's boss was having an affair with one of his co-workers for about 6 months. Mostly everyone at the hotel knew and hated them for it, and had been engaged for 4 months. He had his wedding at my hotel, so obviously as soon as I saw him saying "I do," I knew it could not last long. More info. So he decided to host his wedding at my hotel, and I ended up working the bar. He came over to grab a drink early in the evening and quickly figured out that I was my sister's brother. He smiled and said he had heard a lot about me from my sister, and I told him I heard everything about him, and looked over at the bride. I think he got the hint, because he did not come up to the bar again for the whole night. It was awful to see him smiling, laughing, and saying his vows to this woman he loved, knowing he was sleeping with someone else. I thought very seriously about telling the bride, but decided it wasn't my place to do so. That ended up being a good decision, since she found out 6 months later. They ended up getting divorced, but from what I hear, she ended up meeting an amazing guy, got remarried and is expecting her first child. He and his side girl were fired because they were caught having sex at work by upper management in one of the guest rooms. Turns out the side girl was in a relationship as well, but got dumped for obvious reasons. They ended up dating for a while, but it didn't work out, and as far as I know he is still single. I'm not really sure of this count, but I'm a banquet server, and one time there was a wedding, where the dance floor was in the middle, and then the tables were on both sides of the dance floor, one side for the bride's family and the other for the groom's family. I don't know which side was which, but there was an extremely noticeable difference in each side of the room. On one side, the people were super nice, saying thank you, and even gave us tips. They were all either watching people dance and talking/laughing or dancing themselves. There were like 3 tables that still had people sitting, and all 3 tables were right up next to the dance floor. Then, walking over to the other side of the room, it was the complete opposite. Almost none of them were dancing. All of the tables were completely full, and they were mostly just sitting in silence, staring at the people dancing. Some even looked like they were scowling. I maybe got one thank you from somebody on that side, and got plenty of people asking me to do extra sheet for them. By 9:30, almost everybody on that side of the room was gone, and the tables were really messy, and a majority of the napkins were thrown on the floor underneath the table, which happens a lot, but this was way more than normal. There weren't many drink glasses, just a lot of plates and pieces of food sauce on the tablecloths. Again, this is normal, but usually not to this extent. Meanwhile, the other side of the room stayed until midnight, and their side of the room had all their plates stacked for us to take, and they would take their own empty drinks to our trays for us, even though they didn't have to. I'm not claiming that the family speaks for the person that got married. I just remember thinking looks like they won't be getting together again anytime soon. I used to DJ swing and dance events, and was pretty heavily involved in the community. I had all the equipment from the PA system to tables. Even had DJ CD decks for people who were standing and etc. Given this, I was asked to do a number of friends' weddings as well, which I've always hated, because of the sheer amount of pressure. You do not want to be the sound guy that screwed up, especially with mix and vows, and I did not have good wireless mix considering they cost $400 each or more, not including receiver. I had one wedding where we thought they were perfect for each other. They were our good friends, and it was the first wedding I had done. They were awesome, 2 of the nicest people we know. 3 years later she cheated on him, he cheated on her in revenge, and they separated. That was super disheartening for my wife and I. We actually met via swing/blues dancing as well. The one that I just knew was going to fail, and wasn't a friend not involved in the dance community. Her life's goal was to get married. Didn't matter much to who, and she was extremely narcissistic. Everything was about drawing attention to what she felt was her suffering. First guy's parents offered him a car to not marry her. He took the car. Second guy was freaking 19, and she basically pressured him into marrying her within 6 months of beginning dating him. She was dating him 2 months after the previous guy. He made it to the reception before he noped out. Third guy was our favorite, super nice guy. I had a talk with him beforehand, and tried to tell him it would be a really bad idea to let her pressure him into marriage. That we liked her, but she just wasn't ready, and marriage to her was an end goal. They needed to develop their relationship first, etc. He assured me it wouldn't happen. 2 months later, for a total of 4 months I think, they were engaged. That one stuck point, we had to stop hanging out with them despite really liking them both. All they did was bicker and fight with each other every freaking time we saw them. It was constant sniping, arguing, and just general negativity. This was both before and after their marriage. I can't believe they are still together. Last I heard, before we quit seeing her, and I unfriended her on Facebook, so I don't need to see the negativity. She had gone doctor to doctor insisting her child was autistic, until she could get a doctor that would diagnose it, then was constantly posting on Facebook about how horrible her life was because of it. From everything we could see, the child was perfectly normal, but she was treating him as autistic to the degree that she was beginning to stunt his development. Last I heard, she had a second kid and did the same thing. I still can't believe they're together. They have to be absolutely miserable. Edit. I'd also note that she was pretty ridiculously hot, and I'm pretty sure this was a factor in how much success she had in getting engaged practically before the relationship started. A friend of mine, in her very early 30s, somewhere around 32, called me one day saying she wanted to grab lunch. We went ahead and met up, and I just knew she was ready to throw a bomb at me. After we finished our meals, she gets the courage and tells me she's getting married. I was shocked because I didn't even know she was dating anyone. A year prior to this, she got out of a very long relationship, and I knew she wanted to take some time for herself. Of course, I congratulate her and ask who the lucky guy is, to which her replies, "Don't laugh, this serious," and in that moment I realized the marriage wouldn't last. Don't ask me why, but I just knew. The groom was a younger guy. I think okay, not really a problem here. They've been seeing each other for 2 months. Okay, and moved in together after only 2 weeks, but she knows he's the one. I, being a very straightforward kinda girl, asked her, "Are you sure you wanna go ahead and marry the guy?" To which, of course, she said yes. Well, okay then. Let's do this. I was named the bridesmaid. Around where I'm from you only have one, so in the next few weeks I ended up spending a lot of time with the bride and groom. Apparently they were in a hurry to get married, and no, she wasn't pregnant. I asked multiple times. What I found to be extremely strange with him was the fact that he was very needy and attached, I think is the word, to her. Examples of behavior: he went everywhere with us during our trips for wedding purchases, including the wedding dress. Everywhere. I just couldn't shake him away from us. During the bachelorette party, he called the bride non-stop. Every 10 minutes he would call her asking, "What are you doing now? Do you miss me? I love you." Blah blah. The bachelorette party ended after only 2 hours because he showed up pissed drunk, together with the bachelors from his bachelor's party, and starting making a scene outside the bar we were in, crying and saying that he missed her and he didn't want to be away from her so long. I tried convincing the guys to get him out of there, but they explained they already tried like hell to stop him and couldn't. At one point, I took the bride aside and told her it's not too late, we can still cancel the wedding. Are you sure you wanna go through with this? That's when I saw doubt in her eyes, but she shook it off and blamed his behavior on the alcohol. He sat with us during her make-up session just before the wedding event. He wasn't even doing anything, just sat there looking at us and throwing his opinion here and there. Right before the wedding party he started spreading the word that he absolutely does not want to complete one tradition we have, which was the stealing of the bride. The tradition itself is very silly, but fun for everyone. Basically, some of the close friends of either groom or bride steal the bride and run off around local bars, and after an hour or so they call the groom for ransom, usually alcohol, after which they return with the bride and they receive the promised ransom. Now, when I say he spread the word he doesn't want to uphold this tradition, I mean he repeatedly told everyone attending the wedding party. Well, guess what? The groom's brother had different plans and he secretly came to me at one point asking me to distract the groom for a couple of minutes so he could steal the bride. I reminded him of his brother's wish and he shrugged it off and said it will be fun, and, of course, I agreed. The bride sure deserved a break from that needy little man, so I managed to distract the groom for only 2 minutes while his brother took the bride outside. It took the groom another 2 minutes to realize she was gone, and me, trying to give the brother a chance to run with the bride, convinced him she was probably in the bathroom. After another couple of minutes he was starting to get worried and went on to search for the bride in the bathroom and came out crying and yelling her name. He went full on bananas realizing she was gone, and somehow he was convinced she left him. I couldn't help myself from laughing. I hid behind my date so I could laugh while explaining what happened. After a couple of minutes of this crazy, someone took pity on him and told him what actually happened. The groom then called his brother and demanded to bring the bride back or else. It took another couple of minutes to convince the brother to come back, and oh boy, the bride was not so happy about returning so soon. They were gone for around 15 minutes. They didn't even make it to one bar. Less than a year later I found out they got divorced. I wonder why. I worked a couple of wedding gigs with my ex as a bartender. Saw some cute weddings, but the one that sticks in my mind haunts me forever. The bridesmaids were all carbon copies of each other. It was freaky. Turns out the groom had a type and the bride chose bridesmaids who were not his type. The bride and groom made scrapbooks to go on the table with little things about their relationship, the bus ticket from their first date, cinema tickets, stuff like that. Well, apparently the bride didn't check over his part too well, because the group of Pepper figured out a few of the things in there was from a previous relationship he'd had. The best man speech involved several stories about the groom's ex-girlfriends and the backquote antics from lads' holidays that the bride did not look impressed with. The bride spoke to all the staff awfully. The groom had to come back and apologize for her after every interaction. The mother of the bride sat crying in the corner all night. The mother of the groom had apparently taken off before the vows. The guests seemed to have formed cliques and no one outside of that clique spoke to each other. At the end of the night one of the guests threw up all over the dance floor, and holy mother of Jesus, you have never seen so much vomit in all your life. It took 6 of us 10 minutes to clean it, all while the bride kept shouting that we weren't working fast enough. They didn't end up going back to the hotel together. I think she figured out the scrapbook thing. Yes, once the couple leaves, the photographer and or minister will come up to the wedding coordinator, me, and ask were they that bizarre when checking in. Did they seem intoxicated to you? I got so many bad vibes. And then those couples will sometimes call back and ask about an annulment. One of the questions I ask when checking in is, do you want there to be a mention of God during the ceremony, or did you prefer it to be civil and non-religious? I definitely get a lot of couples just staring at each other for uncomfortably long. How was this not a conversation before you got married? We even put this in the confirmation email so you can discuss it beforehand. But no one reads emails. They only contain vital information about your legally binding contract and details of supposedly one of the happiest days of your life. I think because culturally, your wedding is supposed to be the biggest, most elaborate / expensive event in your life. Basically you should live like a celebrity for the day. People feel the need to play roles to feel like they fit in or belong on that day. Some brides pick Bridezilla, which sucks, but is definitely not as bad as the groom who plays a role I don't even want to be here, because all of this is a stupid waste of money and time for some dumb girly pictures. I truly believe that, even though wedding events are all different, they are not for everyone. I used to do wedding videography. The grooms are always mic'd up throughout the entire event. I think these idiots forget about the mic, or assume when a camera isn't pointed at them, they are not being recorded, but that's not how it works. I have their audio of the entire time that it is on, so I often bust the groom or one of his groomsmen at some point commenting about his cheating, having cheated, or worst case plans to cheat. One time a groom was commenting about having had sex with his bride's sister earlier that morning. Another time, a groom was laughing at his boys about how he's already screwed all the women in the wedding party and his bride has no idea. Another guy mentioned how his side chick was going to be in Hawaii while they were on their honeymoon, and how he needs to find a way to get away from his new wife, to go bang her at some point while he's there. One of my faves was a friend of the groom crudely harassing the cuckold groom about how, bro, the threesomes better not stop, just because you guys are married now. To each their own, I suppose. Even instances where it wasn't a dude doubting himself for cheating or being a total sheet bag, you still catch comments that would horrify the bride if she ever heard them. So while some of these seem so outrageous, I half wondered if it's true or just locker room talk / boys bloviating. Regardless, every time it always made me really mad and feel sorry for these poor brides later as I'm sitting there editing and putting together this beautiful wedding video for her on her happiest day, fully knowing what a deceitful cheat she just committed herself to. And these aren't like some one-offs. I've probably come across a dozen or more instances of this in the 50 or so weddings I did. I was in one. Friend of mine did a destination wedding just outside Yellowstone National Park in Gardiner, Montana. It's a beautiful area, but the town itself is pretty meh. They held the ceremony in an old chapel there and everything went on without a hitch. Then it was on to photos around the geysers in YNP Point. That's when the trouble started. Point everything was good, but about an hour in, I'm not feeling well. Like I feel dizzy, nauseous, etc. People were saying I looked quite pale. Point it was early September and pretty warm and the grooms were wearing the full 3-piece suit. So I figured I was just overheating and needed some fluids. Someone ran and got me some red Gatorade and saltine crackers. I consumed that and felt way better on the way back to the community center for the reception. Point problem is, once we arrived, the nausea hit harder. I left to find a bathroom and found one in the community center basement. Hung out in there for a bit, but no vomiting or anything, so I walked out and realized I was in a workout area of sorts. It was nice and cool down there. Randomly 2 guys were lifting weights, and I felt awkward being there, but I liked the coolness. Just as I thought I was feeling better, the urge to vomit struck, and vomit I did. A beautiful red gusher of Gatorade. I grabbed the nearest thing I could find, so I wasn't projectiling everywhere. Unfortunately, it was a bucket filled with used gym towels. Horrified after the fact, I quickly ran outside with the bucket. Point at this time, my wife finally tracked me down. I explained what went down and told her why I had the bucket of gym towels covered in cherry red vomit. Point I said we have to get rid of the evidence and she agreed. Nothing of this was sane, but we just wandered until we hit the countryside and then I just left the bucket in a field. It seemed rational at the time. Point during the walk, she informed me half the bridal party had come down ill too. I felt terrible. The ceremony had already started, and half the bridal party was at their rented cabins puking their guts out. Point, and I was now in the other end phase of the sickness. I couldn't even return to the reception, because I had to run to the bathroom every 5 minimum. Point I guess during the reception, the bride's father got so sheet-faced he burst his pants on the dance floor. The groom, my friend, also was plastered and was no help in the situation. Point the night ended with the bride furious and bawling in the street, husband passed out, half her bridal party sick, and a wedding that started pretty well ended so bad. Point they are unfortunately divorced now. Oh gosh, those two. This wedding happened in 2016. I'm a wedding photographer. I was relatively new to the business. The bride was 22 yo. Super young compared to the vast majority of European weddings. The groom was around 30, and they had only been together for about 6 months. On the wedding day, the bride's best man, yes, she had a best man, was super creepy towards me, always making flirty comments and acting kinda creepy. The bride saw I was uncomfortable, but didn't do anything, and I just ignored him. During the ceremony, she never looked into her groom's eyes, no emotions at all. During the reception, she was always and only with her friends, and probably spent like 5 minutes at all with the groom. As the party went on that night, the aforementioned best man started being pushy and annoying again. At a certain point he grabbed my ass on the dance floor. I pushed him away. He followed me to the toilet and tried to assault me. I slapped him in the face and left immediately after. I was already over time on the contract. The groom might have seen something that night, as she was clearly busy having fun while he was on his own or with his family, and called me the next morning asking me what happened. I told him the story. She was live on speaker and tried to justify that pose of a best man. They then went on honeymoon, where he found out she was cheating with, guess who? The best man. His attempt at assaulting me was apparently a way of making her jealous. I had no words. They started the divorce process as soon as they came home. My sister's second marriage ended in divorce after a couple years. Her first husband had terrible mental health problems and committed suicide. Sometime later she met her second husband and they were just friends. Within a few months, they were dating, and he almost immediately gave her an expensive ring for Valentine's Day. My entire family was stunned by how fast he was moving. He soon asked my parents for her hand. My dad was battling cancer at the time and my parents weren't sure they liked him. They told him they would prefer he wait a while, that it was just too soon, and she was still mourning her first husband. He went ahead and asked her to marry him. At the wedding, no one was into the wedding and it just seemed awkward. They each had their own homes a few hours apart and initially split time in between the two houses. Before long, however, he convinced her to move to his city, and he bought a new house. Happily my sister kept hers. All was well for a few months, and then he started picking fights and breaking her things. It can't be proven that he left a dog she loved outside and unattended and he got hit by a car. He started accusing her of misleading him about her finances and accusing her of exorbitant spending. She filed for a divorce and took people with her to remove her possessions from the house. I listened in by phone and he just said things that made no sense. He refused to sign the divorce papers for more than 2 years and tried to get settlement money from my sister for his own expenses. He alleged my sister had spent $100,000s of dollars, but she had receipts for everything and could show that any spending from joint accounts was for the house, or for legitimate family expenses, or for him alone. 3 different law firms dropped him as a client, and if he hadn't signed off on the divorce, the 4th was going to drop him too. Fortunately my sister got out, but I'm sure things would have gotten worse. If someone rushes to marry, run away. This is just one I saw as a guest. We got invited to the wedding of my husband's coworker. There were a lot of red flags before the wedding. There was a huge age gap between them. The bride was like 23 and the groom was in his late 30s. He tracked her location via her phone at all times. Lots of other creepy controlling shit, like the dude is clearly abusive. But we go along. We get there, and there's basically no one from the groom's side. No family, one groomsman, and like a friend. Weird, but, point obviously the only people we know there are my husband's other coworkers. We were all the only ones who clapped at the ceremony or the reception. When we went through the receiving line after the ceremony, the groom was super aggressive towards all the bride's male coworkers and friends. Typical overly strong handshake, towering over them on purpose, gruff and making awkwardly aggressive jokes. We were the only ones dancing at the reception. Hell, I think only our table even barely touched their food. It was so uncomfortable. Later, my husband and I both step out to go to the bathroom, and he found the bride's brother, her man of honor, a drunk hot wreck in the men's room crying miserably about how his sister has married a monster. They had like 2 kids together, but I think divorced a couple years into the marriage. I still shudder thinking of how much he must have abused her before she got out. Poor girl. My friend did high-end weddings and I'd occasionally help as a server or runner, or whatever she needed. Crazy stories. A prince from Saudi Arabia, think massive FU money, like it doesn't even matter type of money, was marrying an American girl not approved. He needed a full security team to keep his family from kidnapping the woman and killing her to prevent the wedding. Literally they could make her disappear and had the money to cover it up, or whatever. So he had to have all this elaborate fake stuff happening while he married this girl. Once he's married she's safe, but prior to that she's fair game to be taken care of. Insanity. The wedding, even off the reservation of parents' approval, was insane. Then I realized how much money exists in the world that is beyond even what I consider ric. The best man was telling us no way this lasts, because the backgrounds are so different, and when she goes back to his country she's in for a real culture shock and her normal life is over. My friend can tell if a marriage is going to last within minutes of meeting the couple. She said 1. Alcohol, 2. Family differences, and 3. Getting married for show. Other 3 biggers that she has seen consistently. Either one or both of them are alcoholics or drink so much and so frequently that it's a problem. Family backgrounds are just too different. Destined to fail without serious boundaries/therapy. And for rich people there's serious pressure to have an elaborate wedding. The match itself doesn't matter. People want to flaunt their money. Those 3 things are most common and easy to spot for her. She said if she ever got married she would go small, informal and meaningful. The big weddings really are about other people and a social statement, and not celebrating a milestone with your best friend in front of those you love. I was doing wedding hair and makeup for a good friend of mine, and I never really interacted with her man, ever. After her makeup was done and I was working on her hair, she started crying and told me how he called her fat a week prior because of the size of her new jeans that she was showing him. She's not overweight at all. This was not the first time he had said something like this, and I asked her why she was still planning on marrying this douchebag, and she just said it's already paid for. I feel like this is a common reason people still follow through, and it's sad AF. Lasted 2 years with half of that being basically separated. Last year I did her wedding makeup and hair again for her second wedding to an amazing man, and it was in her mom's backyard with maybe 10 people. It was beautiful, and he is so good to her. When I was doing hair and makeup for another couple whom I didn't know, the soon to be hubby was watching me do her makeup like a hawk, critiquing every little thing I did. That lipstick is too dark. Her hair should be up, not down. She needs bigger lashes. This poor young girl didn't even have a say in her dress. I live in a small town, so I found out that it lasted about 2 months before he cheated on her with a girl he was going to the gym with. I was engaged once, and luckily that ended before marriage. Lesson learned, and no interest in marriage after that. It's expensive paper and weddings are just for guests, in my opinion. Since when did loving someone have to be proven to others through extravagant weddings and anxiety and stress and money, and be filed away in a courthouse? 2 stories, one from each side of the coin. Used to work for a large flower shop in the Chicago area, deliveries and servicing weddings on the weekends. Good money through high school and college. Was taking out the flowers for a wedding a fair distance away from the shop, and oddly enough all but the bride's bouquet was silk. Owner of the shop told me it was because this was the 3rd time for this wedding, and the bride got tired of paying for real flowers. The customer is always right, so I went with it. I got the flowers to the house for a beautiful backyard wedding, and while waiting for the MOTB to come back with the check for the balance, I got to chat with the bride. It turns out her fiancé is a smoke jumper who gets called away at a moment's notice and has missed the 2 previous wedding dates due to work. The bride is one of the calmest, determined people I've ever met, and she intends to marry him this time for sure. This is one of the ones I knew would last. The flip side, one of my co-workers at another job was telling me about her wedding plans. I asked where she was planning on honeymooning. She responded that they couldn't afford a honeymoon because her fiancé was still paying off the honeymoon from his second wedding. Turns out his bride and he had come home on separate planes from it. I knew the groom through work. He was at a different location, and he was an uber controlling jerk. Everybody who knew them saw the future with absolute clarity, but she was so wrapped up in the idea of getting married and mistaking control for care that she couldn't see it herself. It lasted about 6 months before he started dating another co-worker and filing for divorce while planning his 4th wedding. We started referring to the new fiancé as a future former Mrs. name redacted to protect the guilty. Seeing as at least half of all weddings do not last much more than 10 years, anyone in the industry must have seen many failures in the making. I did wedding photography as a sideline from equestrian photography. I got a request from one to do the other. My biggest take on failures was the bigger and more expensive, the greater the chance. The bigger events end up more about the bride and less about the couple. The groom becomes an afterthought. If asked, I always suggested a small private wedding first. Invite only close family and friends. After all, the wedding is supposed to be about the couple and their pledge to each other. Save the pomp and ceremony for the reception. Because, when all those people leave, the couple will be left alone. The best wedding I did was at a small church with not much room. The reception was at a community meeting hall. The kids and most of the family were involved in getting the hall ready. I laminated the posters the kids made and added them to the album. And I also made sure I got everyone in a photo. Weddings and funerals are sometimes the only time you see some people. The reception line is a good place to do this. But wedding photography is no longer as viable for a trade. Cell phones have taken over, and a DJ is where the money goes. A photo album is replaced by a computer file or just a cell phone memory card. I ended up doing both the album and the memory card before I finally gave up trying. Equestrian photography went a similar route. This is going to get buried, and I don't work in the industry. I was a groomsman, and I'm just going to skim over the main points, because we could be sitting here forever if I went into it. The bride was a nightmare, but the groom, one of my best friends, made a lot of wrong moves too. He is in no way shape or form innocent in all this. Bride was a piece of work right from the get-go, hated all of his friends and family. It was a nightmare, but they still ended up buying a house together and he proposed. He made a lot of money and she worked random jobs to get by. At some point in time after the proposal she stopped putting out, so he did what he thought would be okay and started watching porn and taking care of things himself. She found out and lost it on him, so that put quite the divide in their relationship. We were all surprised it didn't end then and there. It would have been better if it did. After a while I guess he started taking pictures of girls on his phone, her friends, things like that, and would go on girls' social media pages and use that to do the deed. My dude was not making any right moves, and I'm with every other person in saying he should not have done that. It's creepy and weird, but what's done is done. She ended up finding the pictures and their relationship blew up again, but still they continued to plan the marriage. All of the groomsmen tried to talk to him to call off the wedding, but he never did. It was very much of a wedding is going to fix all our problems scenario. They ended up getting married. The wedding was a bit of a mess. She had an episode where she overheated and freaked out on everyone trying to help her. Her brother got wasted and fought with some other family member. One of her family members showed up in camo from head to toe. Her family was classy as fuck anyway. They get married. That lasted 6 months and they separated. The divorce was a long drawn out process that took the better part of 3 years. We already hated her, so it wasn't a surprise. My buddy is a gentle soul. He would give you the shirt off his back if you needed it. I felt terrible for him, but we all told him to get out before the marriage. After the divorce was finalized we thought that would be the end of it, but this girl continues to make a fool of him. About a year after the divorce someone sends him a message with a link to the dirty. I guess she got on someone's sheet list and they dragged her through the mud and back on that site. The things that were said about her were downright atrocious. If I didn't already hate the beach so much I would feel terrible for her. That website is disgusting and anyone who contributes to it is just as bad as the person they are writing, but I would be lying if I said I didn't laugh long and hard when I first read it. In the post though they specifically mention my friend in first and last name, saying that she had cheated on him amongst other things. It was written out like this poor guy had to go through, but I felt horrible that they put his full name. Could have used an ex-husband or something anyway. Now we all live happily ever after. My dude is very much living the single bachelor life. He's dated a few girls since then. His taste in women is not very good lol. I have 3 stories, all ended in divorce. The first was a couple of vegans, or should I say very militant vegan bride and a husband to a boy who was vegan, but not really by choice. The place I work at is kinda boho chic, but we also pride ourselves in BBQ smoking meats and grilling just about every piece of meat you can imagine. We had to prepare an all vegan menu with 6 courses, no alcohol was allowed to be served, and every grill or smoker had to be removed. The guests, who were mainly omnivores, were annoyed at first and then actively angry, so we served them shots and beer to at least placate them in secret. The marriage lasted about a year. He is no longer a vegan. The second was more dramatic. The bride was in a state of distress from the minute she arrived. She was drinking champagne like there is no tomorrow, so by the time the ceremony was held she was kinda calmish. After the ceremony there was a dinner. The groom was mingling with his buddies. The bride got up and started crying and running away up the hill towards the main road. My boss ran after her and then we tried to console and reason with her. She was convinced that getting married was a mistake, and I mean she was not wrong. Her new husband disappeared with his buddies to party on their own and left all their relatives completely confused and angry. The third one was more fun, let's say. Everything went great, everyone was happy and cool, until the groom's sister found his new wife screwing with his best man in our toilets. So that marriage was over even before it started. On the plus side, the bride did end up with the above mentioned best man. They got married and have 2 kids together, but yay, we can tell a lot of stories. Worked as a planner for a while and a few interesting moments stand out, but not necessarily about the couple. Went to drop some items off in the bridal suite, which is all set up with rose petals and champagne. Walk in on the mother of the bride posing for nudes on the bed with the bride's aunt photographing. Bride and groom barely talk. He's occupied with his multiple outfit changes, and she's talking very intimately and affectionately with her brother all night. One of the most expensive weddings we ever did went off without a hitch, but they didn't tip, and mother of the bride's only comment to us was that we used the wrong cake topper. She gave us two. I often wonder how they ended up. A really high-end, well-known restaurant that also catered was doing the event, run by a husband and wife team. Wife is running the event, and the husband is back at the restaurant. Wife and sous chef are being real shady all day, and eventually one of my team spots them hooking up against the side of the building by the parking lot. We keep it to ourselves, but later when their team leaves and all heads back to the restaurant they never arrive, and are radio silent. Apparently their whole crew knew. Sous chef was mysteriously removed from their website the next day. Friend of the groom arrived with a date he hadn't asked for, and he wasn't invited with a +1, and we had to hunt for a chair to squeeze her in at his table. It was clear she was way more into him than he was into her, and after being ignored most of the night she proceeded to gather all of the wounded soldiers scattered around. When the bar closed to transition to a casual bonfire after party, it was at a farm, so chill outdoorsy vibes. She got so drunk she passed out face down on the ground in front of the porta potties, where she was discovered by the mother of the groom. He dumped her in the backseat of his car and tried to keep partying. Needless to say, it pretty much killed the night and everyone left shortly after. Felt pretty bad for the couple whose night ended on a slightly sour note. Oh lordy. I'm sure most people who work weddings could write a book of their experiences. Sadly, more situations than you would think. It's clear the groom or bride aren't being faithful to one another, being extremely flirty with particular guests, or outright cheating. My boyfriend who works weddings, as well as myself, once caught a groom getting off with one of the bridesmaids in the toilets and vice versa on another occasion. I witnessed a groom take off his wedding ring to dance with another guest after she whispered in his ear while the bride was out of the room, and he was touching the guests as the whole time. Don't ask me why none of the other guests said anything. Myself and the other staff were just as baffled. We guessed maybe the friends and family didn't want to be that person accusing them of something going on, only to have them like, wow, that's so sick. You would think that, but that's just conjecture. One wedding I did, you could have literally drawn a line down the reception room with the separate families on either side at any point in the evening. Doesn't necessarily mean the marriage would end in divorce, but the atmosphere was tense, like some massive inter-family beef had gone down. In that situation, I have no idea why you would have a massive wedding rather than just eloping with maybe a few chosen people. I've planned and worked dozens of weddings and would say they are 50 over 50 weird to genuinely lovely or fun. Know me, but I'm friends with some priests. One was doing the pre-marriage counseling for my wife's coworker. He's 32, fiancé is 21. The priest asked me to tell the couple to not go through with the wedding because they are not ready, but he can't tell them directly because it's against the church rules. We told the coworker that maybe he should wait, since it's only been 6 months since he met her. At the wedding reception, she's been dancing with every guy except him since he's passed out. She's having the time of her life and he's sleeping through it. She ends up leaving him 6 months later for his brother-in-law. Thankfully no children. Also best man at a wedding where the groom called me a week before asking if he should cancel the wedding. I said yes, if he even asked that question. And definitely, since he met her in July and it's only November. Their parents were pushing them to get married quickly, since the couple are old, 43 meters, 38F. Both are well-paid software engineers at companies you use every day. $150k plus/EACH back in 2007. She makes him move in with her parents. She gets pregnant quickly, quits her job, even though her parents take care of the baby. He can't live with her parents anymore and wants them to move out. She told him to leave and don't worry about the divorce, since she never mailed in the paperwork for the marriage license because she knew it wasn't going to work out. Turned out she manipulated the monk into giving her the paperwork to mail to the county. This kind of thing must happen a lot because the priest at my wedding signed the paperwork, sealed the envelope, and had the altar boy mailed it out while we were still at the altar. I thought he was just being thorough. Obligatory. I'm not in X field, but I'm gonna say it anyways. When the bride-to-be is excited for the wedding more than she is about being married. I know a couple of women, two in particular, who would not stop posting about their future wedding, and every step of the way, all of social media needed to know how their wedding planning was going, and then add in the obligatory "oh I took a selfie admiring was just accidentally in the photo," or taking a selfie with a drink and she's obviously holding it with her in hand. It's like, we get it, you're engaged. Safe to say the guys they were gonna marry knew that these women only really cared about the wedding and being the center of attention for a whole night, and for a couple months on social media leading up to the wedding. Neither of them ended up doing the wedding because they were both called off. I also have a patient who is a photographer and does weddings almost every weekend in my area, and he told me the same thing. Now, I'm paraphrasing here, but he's like, you will know which marriages last by looking at the bride and understanding why she cares about the wedding so much. If you get the vibe that she's doing it because it's the cool thing to do and for social points, aka attention seeking, the marriage will most definitely not last. I've done photography work for many of my friends' weddings and have predicted many divorces this way. I used to be a stylist, and while I did not work at weddings on site, plenty of wedding parties received services at the salon I worked at, and I was part of many conversations with brides and their families, and it became very easy to tell which marriage would last versus which would not. For the most part, easiest, the bride-to-be who literally ended every sentence about her husband to be with backquote, "if it doesn't work we can always get divorced," like she was already convinced it was going to end anyway before it even began. Listening to her made me very sad, and I felt really sorry for the man who was about to commit so much to her. Others, all about the attitude, just like my example above. Most women were excited and hopeful, while others were nervous and quiet, and few were like the woman above, negative from the start and spoke of their betrothed like a child or unwanted pet. I truly believe that their attitudes from the onset, especially while on display to total strangers the day of / before this huge commitment to their partner, was a precursor to the tone of their relationship moving forward. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm saying as laying blame on the brides. It's just that I only saw the brides and their parties, so that's the only perspective I have. I'm sure the same goes for grooms as well. I always wonder if my vendors knew my marriage wasn't going to last. I know I gaslit myself into thinking it would, but I knew it was headed in a bad direction before we even got our photos back. The wedding was largely uneventful, but there were some hiccups, namely, a miscommunication caused about half of the wedding guests to arrive an hour late, and there was some drama with the makeup artist who had been double booked. So the ceremony started an hour late and cocktail hour became a half an hour, and I rallied the wedding party and we all went to help get everything ready so the catering staff wouldn't be too overwhelmed with getting everything back on schedule. Other than one other hiccup involving speeches, there wasn't any juicy drama. Nobody was cheating or on drugs, and there weren't any physical altercations. But I still wonder if the vendors knew. I got divorced like a year after my wedding date, and I remember that on my wedding day, all my vendors looked super stressed out. I was dealing with some familial drama on both sides, but I felt the worst that these people I hired looked like they weren't having a good time. Did the videographer and photographer not get along? Was there drama between the vendors? I had no idea. I remember I walked up to one of my photographers and asked if everything was okay because she looked stressed out, and she said, "Oh, trust me, it's not you." I asked if it was anything I could intervene with, and she told me I'm the bride and I should be enjoying my day. Her husband called me the day after saying they'd never had a bride so concerned with making sure they got a guest meal. Apparently the vendor meals aren't usually the same as the guest meals, and asking if they, the wedding vendors, were okay and thanked me. What? Lol. Apparently it's okay to treat your wedding vendors poorly. Would hire them again in a heartbeat. The photos were amazing, but unfortunately they don't exactly elicit a positive emotional response in me anymore. Every time one of these threads pop up I always click in and wonder if one of my vendors would be in here talking about my wedding, but alas, I didn't have any of the types of antics that get brought up in these sorts of threads at my wedding anyway. When I was younger, my mother catered events and weddings were very profitable, so we did a lot of those. I was around 11 or 12 and would help out a lot as I knew the stuff we would serve and how to make it. We had a staff of about 3 people, not counting me, and I would run the kitchen as far as how to make stuff, while she did cake stuff and planning the event itself. There was a woman, I remember we went to her house and she went over this laundry list of things she wanted. I'm talking fancy faking stuff here. Shrimps, the works. My mom gets all this, but sees this isn't going to end well. The lady lived with her mom is a single wide trailer and 5 people in the house all shared a car. This lady was hosting 50 people and I knew from her list, we are talking $25 a person. My mom goes back to her at $30 a person. The woman, I hear her scream on the phone. She was looking to spend $4 a person maximum. She was informed that's basically soup and saltines. She said fine, I'll take whatever $4 a person gets me. They meet again to discuss more details and the husband to be and the wife to be argue the whole time. He was pushing for $2 a person. They argued for an hour and decided that they could do $2.50 a person. My mom grabbed her stuff and said, you know what, you need to hire someone else. I'm not going to cater saltines and Vienna sausages. The cake you want is going to be $300 and I have no desire to do this wedding. So we left. I got in the car and told my mom, yeah, that's going to end in divorce in a month. She hired another lady my mom knew of and the lady did it for $2 a person. She did finger sandwiches and chips and made the catering woman want to quit. Okay, so I know nothing about weddings except that 50% of them end in divorce. But this seems like the right place to share this story. My friend, E, and his girlfriend, S, invited me to a wedding. Not one to say no to free food, I went with them. So I know E's parents pretty well. His dad's nowhere to be found, and his mom's a little dramatic when she isn't drunk. I had only met S's dad though, and it was her mom that was getting remarried. So on the car ride there, which is super far, I say, I'm excited to meet your mom. S, you think she found the one? Boy, did that open a can of worms. S is a talker. So in about 1 minute flat she has strewn her parents' divorce, her childhood, her family dynamics, and ended with, I don't know, this guy's great, but my mom is a faking psycho, so we'll see how long it lasts. And that's the only part of importance I gathered. I start to recognize where we are going, which is my old favorite party spot. It's over 2 hours from any real civilization and the town has one sheriff who was either too drunk to break up our parties or partying with us. I mentioned it to E. You remember all the times we came out here? And we reminisced about our other friend getting freaked out on acid, walking into the woods, and disappearing for 4 hours. We are talking about the girls we met. So of course, do you remember that time you walked in on me and see about to get with that cougar? If you hadn't witnessed it, I'd never tell the story. We laughed about shit, remembered some bullshit, and let it go. We finally got to this property, which is actually a stone's throw from where we used to park and light fires. I start prepping my apology for the loud noises, wondering if they're living out here, so they can do the same, and decide it's best not to know what their reasons are for living out here, so I stick to a resolute great place you've got, which comes out as Greta Limigard. I look at the woman in a wedding dress and see the woman who 4 or 5 years ago came bounding into our party, grabbed me and one other friend, and put us through the ringer and back again. The look on my face wasn't necessary. He is standing by with a huge grin on his face. S is grabbing his arm and laughing so hard she starts shouting, I'm gonna piss my pants. And Ms. S says, oh god, you're one of his friends? And old boy about to make her a Mrs. walks up, shakes my hand, and says, I'm C. What's your name? Luckily I didn't have to speak, because I was incapable. S and her mom kind of fought over the space to say this guy knows your future wife. I thought the whole time that one of 2 things was gonna happen. Either 1, they're pissed at me and this marriage isn't gonna last, or 2, they're a freaky couple who's trying to get me involved. Luckily it was neither of those. They actually had a really fun wedding. We shot guns and played cornhole. At the end of the night everybody took shots and smoked bowls, and I'd home. I ended up being close friends with E and S for a year after that before things went south in their relationship and E's behavior was terrible, so I cut him off. To my utter shock, S's mom is still married. Former wedding photographer here. To come to mind, point 1, the bride was almost an hour late. Guests actually walked out before she arrived. I was with her during the getting ready stage, and as I was packing up to leave for the church, she suddenly realized she had no transport for her bridesmaids, so I ended up taking 4 in the car with me, not something I would normally ever do. The groom was not surprised when I turned up with a carload of bridesmaids and no sign of a bride. During the wedding reception, the bride made a big deal of having a surprise for the groom and proceeded to play Wind Beneath My Wings very badly on a piano the venue wheeled out. Not only was her playing awful, but she cried through the whole performance. The groom did not once get up to console her or anything and looked miserable through most of the reception. I know they've since divorced. I think they lasted a couple of years. The other was strange and has stayed with me more than 10 years later. Groom looked utterly besotted with the bride, super attentive and not in a creepy maybe he's abusive way. Bride looked like she wanted to be somewhere else. Through the ceremony, during the wedding breakfast and evening reception, she actively avoided her groom and guests, and during the evening I spotted her tucked away in the garden, just by herself, in a dark corner. I left her alone because who knows, right? Maybe she just needed a little time out. But when I left an hour later, she was still there and no one had come looking for her. I hope she found happiness. I did wedding photos for a friend's wedding, and I knew it was cursed from the jump point. I showed up to the park pavilion, where it was being held, an hour early for setup. No one was there. Finally folks started filling in to bring in food, decorations, and folding chairs. So I got a couple spots off the cake and the band, whatever I could to keep busy. Finally, about a half hour before the ceremony was supposed to start, the bridal party shows up and guests start rolling in. The wedding was supposed to be at least somewhat dressy, but almost all the guests were dressed like they just stopped by on their way to pick something up at Walmart. However, so no groom or his party. So I just started taking pictures of the bride and her party and family to kill some time. They looked fine. Went well. 3 hours go by, and the groom and his party finally arrive, and half of them aren't even ready. None of them were even drunk or anything, so I have no clue what the hell they had been doing all day. So now the sun is setting, and 3 of these guys are standing in the middle of the park trying to get dressed. One of them didn't even have the right outfit, which was supposed to be a blue button-up shirt, black slacks, and blue Chuck Taylors. As far as I know, the bride and groom paid for all this stuff, so why he didn't have it, I do not know. He wound up wearing a stained blue stretched out t-shirt, black Dickies, and 10-year-old stained sneakers. They finally get done with the ceremony, and the sun has now set, so I try to explain that the groom and his party's pictures, as well as the couple photos, probably won't look as good, because the only light I had to work with was one light in the pavilion. They wanted them anyway, so we went ahead. The bride's brother wound up giving a speech where he basically just listed off all the things that sticker about the groom and how no one likes him, which, to be fair, is untrue. Lol. To add to this train wreck, she had asked another photographer to show up without telling either of us, so we had to figure out how to work around one another the whole time. And then neither of us got paid. Either. They played about a year and wound up in a very ugly divorce. Was serving a very odd wedding reception once. There were 3 separate tables. One for the friends, one for the groom's family, one for the bride's family. They were arranged in a kind of incomplete square with the DJ dock at the opening, so the dancer floor was supposed to be in the middle. All sides of the tables were used, so loads of people were facing away from other guests, and sometimes you would see someone land some stink eye on someone from the other table. It was clear that the 2 families absolutely hated each other. The bride and groom didn't even have dinner together. They would swap after each course. Entree bride was at table A and groom at table B, main bride at table B and groom at table C, etc. It was so sad. There was no first dance. The first song that played was When I Was Your Man by Bruno Mars. Granted, English was not their first language, but still. And the few people that ended up standing to dance were receiving stink glances and mockeries from the remaining sitting guests. Most awkward service of my life. I remember the next morning my manager pulled me up cause one of the guests had complained about the waitress being too cheerful, and I was like, Fair enough, the guy comes and complains, but you're actually taking the complaint seriously. I have no idea if the couple actually made it through the years, but I hope at least they fled far away from this Montag Capulet type of crap. My cousin was going to marry a woman who I'll call R. To say the least, R wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. Important detail. For as long as I can remember, my cousin has been great friends with a girl who I'll call G. My cousin's fiance was both very childish, spoiled, and an overall drama queen. I went to all of R's dress fittings and such. This woman got an $18,000 dress. When we asked her about their price range, she said that my cousin was paying all of it. That was the first red flag point. The night before the wedding, R got wasted. I mean absolutely trashed. Well, some of the other bridesmaids and I tried to get her to bed, or just get her more sober. She confessed that she had cheated on my cousin. We asked her why, and she said that she had once seen my cousin hugging some girl. As she started describing the girl, I realized that she was talking about G, my cousin's best friend. Fun fact about G, she's gay. We all decided that what R was saying was probably drunk rambling, so we forgot about it until she and my cousin had to say vows. She confessed that she did cheat on him. While the guests were freaking out, she said, and I quote, "Well, he did it first with G, who's here, but we are even now, so we can get married." Another fun fact, my cousin had told R that G was just a friend and also a lesbian who is married. This woman thought that by cheating on him, even after he didn't cheat, and explained what G was, that they were even. I know this isn't the best story, but it's the best that I have.